Tonight's story begins with a wager that should have ended in laughter, and instead turned an entire house into a shrine to shame. It's 1851, on the Mississippi bluffs outside Natchez. A planter with too much rum and too little conscience raises a pair of bone dice and says the sentence that will haunt this episode. "If I lose, I'll wed my cook by dawn." He laughed. His friends laughed. The room, I swear to you, didn't. Before we open the kitchen door on what came next, do one thing for me. If buried histories and quiet revolts are your thing, hit subscribe and tap the bell so these unquiet stories find you first. And tell me where you're listening from in the comments. What do the oldest houses near you refuse to talk about? Now, let's step into the year 1851, into a house called Briar Gate, and into a marriage the law pretended not to see, but the dead wouldn't let alone. The planter's name was Silas Merrick, broad-shouldered, narrow-spirited, the type who smiled with teeth and signed with other people's blood. Briar Gate sat high enough to watch the river crawl and low enough to smell it. Its kitchen, red brick, black iron, breath of soot and cloves, belonged to a woman everyone called Mercy. Not because the world showed her much of it, because she kept the word alive inside soup pots and scars. Mercy could turn bitter greens into a Sunday, stretch a ham hock through a week, and scald a rumor into silence with the side eye of a woman who'd already survived more evenings than the river had names. When the white table was loud with guests, the kitchen grew quieter. Work hum, knife tap, the soft thud of dough folding itself back from pain. Mercy ran that room like time. Nobody owned it, but you disobeyed it at your peril. The bet happened at the Greywater Club, a long room over a livery, lamplight wobbling in whiskey, a preacher's son holding cards, a sheriff without patience counting chips in his head. They were playing brag, then brag became pride, then pride became that sentence. A hush dropped so fast a fly hit the floor. "If I lose, I'll wed my cook by dawn." Who said stop? No one. Who said don't? Only the walls. Silas threw, lost, and tried to laugh the room back awake. But the dice didn't lie, and neither did the man across from him, Cyrus Bell, a broker of cotton, a collector of humiliations. "Dawn," Cyrus said, stepping on the word like a nail. "A vow is a vow." At Briar Gate, Mercy didn't sleep much. She knew when men came home loud that morning would come cruel. She was cleaning the spice drawer when a boy shoved in breathless, eyes big as pewter cups. "They say," he started. She had him drink water first. Then he said it. Her hand found the edge of the table and stayed there until the shake passed. Here is something you should know about Mercy. She didn't throw things. She didn't wail. She did not break. She gathered. A small disc of iron, bread ring, for shaping loaves so uniform they look like lies. A sprig of rosemary, for remembrance the law can't outlaw. A length of red thread, twisted twice, because names change but knots hold. She tucked them into her apron and went to stoke the ovens. Fire wakes fastest when it knows it's being watched. They came in like a storm with fancy boots. Silas read from drink and victory stories that weren't his. The sheriff, Withers, doing law the way a butcher does math. A circuit preacher who had a Bible in one hand and yesterday's sins under his fingernails. Behind them floated a few men who collected scenes like stamps. The kitchen, Mercy's country, filled with their breath. "We are to have a ceremony," Silas announced, as if ceremonies were furniture. He grinned around at the men. "Seems I'm a marrying man." The preacher cleared his throat. He'd married couples in fields before, under trees, with hymns for rings. He'd never married a man to a woman the law refused to name a wife. "The Lord," he began, and the Lord left the room. Mercy set a loaf pan down so gently it made no sound. She met Silas's eyes long enough to tell him two things without words. "I see what you're doing, and I will not be smaller than it." "You will answer I do," Sheriff Withers instructed, as if that could pull dignity out of a ditch. Mercy wiped her hands on her apron. "I will answer what I mean," she said, steady. Across the stove, the young scullion boy, Samuel, made himself a wall with his shoulders to hide the fear trying to climb his face. A woman from the house, Miss Eliza, Silas's sister, hovered in the doorway, laces half-tied, kindness wrestling a lifetime of carefulness. She watched her brother perform a cruelty dressed as a joke and folded her hands so tight her knuckles shone like porcelain. "Silas," she whispered, "but some men only hear no when it says their name on a judge's tongue." The preacher began. The words tried to be holy. They were not. "Do you, Silas Merrick, take—" He paused, the pause saying everything decent he had left. "This woman." Silas grinned. "I do," he said, like a toast. "Do you," the preacher turned to Mercy, "take this man?" Mercy reached into her apron and slipped the iron ring over her finger, where a wedding band would lie if the world were different and she were free. The iron was cool. It remembered the shape of heat. "I take," Mercy said, and every ear leaned in, hungry to witness a humiliation. "What cannot be taken?" The men blinked. The preacher swallowed. The sheriff frowned like someone had changed the rules of a game halfway through. "I take," Mercy continued, voice low, uncowed, "God for witness, the living for record, the dead for judge. I take the bread from the oven when it's fit to feed, the knife when it's fit to carve, the word when it's fit to stand. And I take back from this man all that was stolen that can be carried in a hand, a name or a night." Silas laughed too loudly. "She's a poet. Put it in the ledger," he jeered. Mercy lifted the sprig of rosemary to her lips. To some, it smelled like Sunday. Tonight it smelled like a promise. She tucked it into the seam of the stove. Smoke braided it into itself, the room turning suddenly attentive, as if walls crave vows the way parched land craves rain. The preacher, trembling now, reached for an ending. By the authority vested in, he ran out of authority and found only words. "I pronounce you bound." Bound. The kitchen heard it. The iron heard it. The men, who believed in paper, didn't. Mercy nodded once, as if someone she respected had finally walked in. She let the red thread drop to the floor. Samuel put his foot over it, quick. Later, he would knot it to the useless lace of a boot and carry it like a concealed blade. "Give her a ring," Cyrus Bell drawled from the back, bored with the taste of victory and hungry for spectacle. "Give the bride a ring." Silas grabbed the first round thing he saw, a tarnished napkin ring, and shoved it forward. Mercy didn't take it. She reached instead for a small thing that had lived for weeks in the back of the spice drawer, a single bone die, face worn smooth where men's hopes had turned it into a talisman. She pressed it into a lump of raw dough, deep. "There's your ring," she said, to no one in particular. "Let's see how it bakes." Men laughed, uneasily. Jests rot quick in hot rooms. It ended with claps on backs and the sheriff slapping the preacher like he was a dog that had fetched the wrong stick. The men walked out of Mercy's country trailing smoke. Only Miss Eliza stayed, a statue trying to weep. She lifted the napkin ring, turned it in her fingers as if it would admit what it had almost been used for, and set it down with the care you give a venomous thing that hasn't decided whether to bite. Mercy finished the loaf. She slid it from the pan. Steam breathed a secret into the room. In the heel, where the crisp is sweetest, the impression of the bone die had baked itself into a white crater. The pips melted into a strange, perfect pattern. 1 a 3. 13. Miss Eliza saw it too. "Is that chance?" she asked, as if chance ever did anything alone. 13 is the number the table hates, Mercy said, cutting the bread with a knife that had never trembled. "It won't sit right. It won't divide clean. It's the seat they pull away before a woman can take it." She handed the first slice to Samuel. "For your pocket," she told him, "not your mouth." The boy nodded, solemn as a deacon, and hid the bread like it was a coin from a kingdom that still believed in justice. That night, Briargate did what big houses do when they've done something small and mean. It locked its doors and slept loud to drown out listening. But paper doesn't sleep. In Silas Merrick's study, the family ledger lay open where he'd left it, a wine ring staining the margin. The ink in his name, Silas, bled, just a little, as if a wet finger had smudged it, as if the page objected to what it had been asked to hold. In the kitchen, Mercy put the iron ring on the nail above the stove where ladles hung. She tied the red thread to its loop. She crushed the rosemary to powder and mixed it with flour, salt, and the sort of patience that looks like stillness and is nothing of the kind. "Bound," she said into the quiet, trying on the word the way a soldier tries a new boot. It pinched. She would walk in it anyway. Somewhere between midnight and the hour when birds rehearse the idea of morning, the stove sighed. The die in the heel of the bread, 1 of 3, shifted, just enough that you could swear you heard it roll. Briargate woke like a guilty man, early, loud, and pretending nothing had happened. By first light, Mercy had boiled coffee black enough to float a nail and stacked pans like shields. She kept the iron ring on its nail above the stove and the red thread tied to it, a quiet flag declaring the kitchen a sovereign state. Miss Eliza slipped in with a face that had cried and powdered itself honest about it. She set down a silver tray and picked up a broom, as if sweeping could erase last night's word, bound. "Does it stand?" she whispered. "Words stand when the living witness and the dead agree," Mercy said, testing the oven with the back of her hand. Both were in the room. Samuel, barefoot, fierce, 12 going on old, brought in split oak. "The men at the quarters talking," he said. "They say you're—" The boy tripped on the last word. "Wife." The house had no place for it to land. "Then let them talk strong," Mercy answered. "Strong words are like strong tea, bitter at first, but they hold you upright." Across the hall, Silas snored with the bravado of a man who believes a night of sleep can make a thing not true. In his study, the family ledger lay open to last night's wine ring, the stain dried into a dark, perfect circle. Ink had crawled in the night. Under Silas Merrick, a hairline split now ran through the S, like a lightning crack in a summer sky. Mercy rolled dough with the calm of a clock. She pressed her thumb into each loaf, blessing, measure, warning. The impression of the die from last night still lived in the heel of one loaf, 1 of 3, a pale crater that refused to smooth out. She dusted it with flour and slid it deep into the oven's belly, a message mailed to heat and time. Eliza watched Mercy's hands. "I dreamed the number," she said, embarrassed, as if superstition were a dress she'd been caught wearing. 13. At the table. 13 is the seat they yank away just as you're about to sit, Mercy replied. But all a seat is 4 good legs and a flat truth. We can build our own. By noon, Cyrus Bell sent a note with a rider who had the grin of a man who thinks someone else's humiliation owes him a parade. A supper, it said. Tonight, at Briargate. Celebrate the union. Bring the bride to the head of the table. Mercy read it, wiped her hands, and said nothing. She pulled rosemary from the string above the hearth and stripped it clean. "We'll cook," she said. "We will feed them so they cannot say they came and left hungry. Let the rest be the Lord's part, or the ledger's." She sent Samuel to the quarters with 2 heel-end slices of the 13 loaf and instruction to pass them to hands that knew how to listen. "Tell them, keep this where a man hides his coins," she said. "Tell them, when you hear the kitchen bell ring 1 and 3, count your breath and wait." "Wait for what?" Samuel asked. "The house will tell us," Mercy said, and that answer did not scare the boy the way it would have frightened a man. The supper dragged the river into the house, mud on boots, fog on collars, a humidity of mean cheer. They lit the candelabras as if flame belonged to them. Cyrus Bell arrived in a jacket that believed in itself more than he believed in anything else. Sheriff Withers came with a ledger of his own and a face like a meat hook. The circuit preacher had washed his hands so hard the skin stood up in ridges, and he would not look at Mercy the first time she passed with a tray. Silas held court at the head of the table, loud with a laughter that needed witnesses. "Where's the bride?" He called into the kitchen like a hunter calling into trees for an echo. "Working," Mercy replied, not raising her voice, because the distance between kitchen and dining room was a thing she could cross and he could not. The menu was simple because simple food tells fewer lies. Ash-baked sweet potatoes split open to show a heart like late sunlight, greens with smoke and a slap of heat, hoe cakes crisp as paper promises, and a bisque so smooth the spoons came away wanting more of themselves. Mercy mulled 30 biscuits, then paused. She made a 31st, small as a coin, and pressed a single-bone die into its center, deep, 1 of 3, like a secret dropped into a well. The dining room started its own stories, the kind men tell each other when they want to be braver than they are. A toast. Cyrus rose, swaying. To vows kept and kept quiet. Cups lifted. Miss Eliza did not drink. She watched the door between her world and Mercy's and counted under her breath. 1, 2, 3, 4, until she reached 13, and then started again. Mercy rang the kitchen bell, once, then thrice. Samuel, polishing glasses in the corner like a child no one sees, glanced up sharply, caught Miss Eliza's eye, and nodded. Out back, in the dark beyond the laundry, a rustle answered, the quarters listening. The biscuits came out golden, butter freckled, steam rolling like relieved shoulders. Silas grabbed first, because he always did. Cyrus grabbed second, because men like him live on the leftovers of greater cruelties. The sheriff took 2 with the entitlement of law eating twice. Laughter rose, a sound that smelled like stale smoke and newer money. Cyrus bit, choked, and fished something cube-hard from his mouth. He spat it into his palm. A die blinked white in his hand, damp with his saliva. 1 pip. 3. He went red. Men laughed, then stopped, then pretended they hadn't laughed. Mercy stood in the doorway holding a tray and watched the little cube come clean in his napkin, coming back to its old shine as if it had never been used for anything but choice and chance. "A bride's game," Mercy said softly. "A woman must make her own luck when there's none to be had. Mind how you chew." Silas slammed his cup down so hard red wine leapt like a struck animal. "Don't bring your tricks to my table," he snarled. "You brought this table to my vows," Mercy said, still soft. "Now eat." The chandelier shivered. No wind. No draft. It was the shiver of a thing that knows its chain is older than the ceiling that holds it. A crystal drop snapped its wire and fell. It hit the polished table and burst into 13 shards that skidded to the edge and stopped in a perfect circle around Silas's plate. No one breathed for 3 heartbeats. Then the room exhaled lies, draft, poor wiring, even though there were no wires yet to blame. The preacher crossed himself under the table where only God and his own bones could see. Mercy had learned kitchen lore from a woman who never owned her own name and wore her wisdom like an invisible apron. Her mother taught her that bread keeps memory if you feed it right, that an iron ring can be a promise or a prison, depending on who hangs it, that salt is near to tears and near to blood and should be handled with both in mind. Every house has its river, her mother had said on a night when thunder came in on all 4s. You can drown in it or you can throw lines across it. Your lines are heat and habit and the things men don't notice because they never had to. At Briar Gate, the river ran through the ledger. Silas's father had kept it in a chest with a double lock and the smell of secrets. Silas kept it on his desk, as if ownership lived in display. Mercy had eyes in rooms she did not enter. She knew where the key lay, under the paperweight in the shape of a lion whose face had softened with years of handling. She knew which pages Silas read when he wanted to feel big. She knew the page he avoided, the one his father's hand had lettered badly the day he took a debt that came with a promise in small print. That night, while the house snored drunk on spectacle, Miss Eliza brought the ledger to the kitchen wrapped in her shawl. "I am borrowing from my brother," she said, chin high at the lie. "You may borrow from me." Mercy did not touch it. "You open it," she told Eliza. "It's your house's throat. Let it open to its own blood." Eliza unwrapped the ledger and laid it on the table as if it would bite. She lifted the cover. The spine creaked, a coffin sound. Inside, neat columns of numbers marched like soldiers who have never met a grave they didn't think they could avoid. Then a page halfway through, warped, as if a wet hand had pressed it and held it there to see what it would say. At the top, a name, Eliza Catherine. Merrick. And below it, a dowry entry scratched out. Overwritten. Moved. The ink protested, bled, refused to be clean. What is this? Eliza whispered. Something that should have been yours, Mercy said, and something that never should have been anyone's. Under Eliza, a second name in a smaller, tighter hand, Emma. No surname. Next to it, a note, kitchen girl. An outlay for care. A column of dates that did not add up to anything but sorrow. Eliza pressed her fingers to her lips as if to hold in a cry that would turn the men upstairs into murderers. She would have been. She could not finish. Me, Mercy said, not unkindly. Or me one day sooner, one day later. Eliza closed the ledger and then put her hand on it like a woman swearing. We will not leave it as it is, she said. Then witness with me, Mercy answered. Because men will call a thing a lie until the world ends if it suits them. But if two women say it before bread and heat, even the ledger listens. Witnessing remade the house. No candles flew. No chairs walked. Superstition is only loud when it's being sold. What happened was quieter and worse. The numbers changed. The plantation tallies, barrels, bolts, bodies, shifted one by one across the week that followed. Silas could not make a column land where it had landed last month. Cattle counts misremembered themselves. Cotton bales multiplied in the field and halved in the storehouse. Sheriff Withers arrived with a smugness invoice and left with a headache that made him hate light. What are you doing in there? Silas barked, meaning the kitchen, the house's lungs. Breathing, Mercy said, meaning everything. At night, the ledger wrote back. Eliza woke with the sense that a quill had moved when no hand held it. She padded to the kitchen and found the book open to a page she had not turned. In the margin, a column of numbers made of dots. 1, then 3, then 1, then 3. 13 marks in all. She ran a fingertip down the line and her skin prickled as if she had brushed nettle. She blew on the page and the dots scattered a little, like seeds deciding which way was wind. 13's a gate, Mercy said over her shoulder, not looking. There's going through and there's going back. Men call the first a crime and the second an error. Both are changes. Men don't like changes they didn't order. That night Silas decided to take what he had declared already his. He tried the kitchen door and found it resisting, not locked but reluctant, like a shoulder turned half away. He pushed. The old hinge complained. The handle turned. He stepped inside Mercy's country and the heat drew back like a lion deciding whether to stand. This is my house, he said to the stove, to the ladles, to the iron ring hung on its nail. This is my woman. Mercy stood by the table, hands at her sides. Samuel, quick as breath, stepped into the pantry and vanished between the sacks, the way boys do when men make a room smaller than safety. Silas reached for Mercy with a hand used to being the end of every argument. He did not touch her. Between his wrist and her skin, the air stiffened. The iron ring above the stove sang, just a single note, small and true. Silas's hand jerked back as if a cold tooth had bitten him. What the devil? He shut his mouth on the last word like it had cut him. You stood and said a vow, Mercy answered, voice level. No devil in that. Only ears. He swore, ugly and new. He took a step around the table. Mercy reached to the hearth and pinched a pinch of salt between finger and thumb. She did not throw it. She set it on the table between them as if setting down a coin in a toll house. Bread and salt, she said. You want to cross, you pay the wage. Silas slammed his palm down on the grain like he meant to crush it. He lifted his hand, shaking. A perfect white ring of salt powder rimmed his flesh, as tidy as a cuff. His skin reddened where the salt had kissed him, a rash of little truths. He swore again, older this time, and backed out, not because he believed but because his body did. On the threshold, he spat. It landed on the plank and hissed. No flame. No trick. Just the sound of a boundary choosing itself. The preacher came in daylight, hat in hand and voice in tatters. "I dreamed a page," he confessed to Mercy, shaking his head at himself. "I ain't never dreamed paper. I dreamed that ledger and your name written where a ledger don't know where to put it." "Paper learned us," Mercy said. "We can learn it back." He swallowed. "What if I—" He stopped. He had been a man long enough to know how quickly a question becomes a cowardice. "I got a book of law. There's a line, old habit and repute, carriages and front porches. Says a marriage is a marriage when a town starts to call it one, even if the courthouse stutters. It's for folks who jump the broom quicker than a judge can wake up. It ain't made for—" He waved his hat at her life, his fingers ashamed of the air they tried to shape. "Then use the line crooked until it's straight," Mercy said. "Tell the town there's a marriage. Let them chew on the taste of the word till they can't spit it out without losing teeth." The preacher looked sick and relieved. "It will bind you to him in their speaking," he warned. Mercy met his eyes. "He bound me out loud with witnesses," she said. "Now let me bind him back the same." That Sunday, the preacher preached a sermon about vows that made half the pew stiffen and the other half twitch. He spoke of words said in kitchens and under porches and on the back steps of houses that always counted themselves as front. He spoke of God not caring much where you put your feet so long as your mouth told the truth and your hands kept it. He did not say Mercy's name. He did not say Silas's. He said bound until the words sounded new and clean and heavier than anyone in that room wanted to carry out under the sun. By supper, the town said wife. Once a town's mouth catches a word, children play with it. Samuel cut a thin strip of raw biscuit dough and pressed the dice pattern into it with the end of a spoon, 1 of 3. He dried it hard near the stove and slid it into his pocket. He showed the trick to Ruth from the laundry and Abel from the stables and old Ben who was born with the river in his voice. They made 13 tiny wafers and hid them like blessings a thief wouldn't think to steal. They kept the kitchen bell's code. 1 strike, then 3. That night it rang twice that way, then fell still. At the quarters a whispering started that didn't end. Work slowed, but only in ways you'd need a ledger to notice. Harnesses unbuckled themselves 3 stalls down. A wagon axle that had never made a sound found a new squeak. Cotton turned damp in a dry barn. The kind of mischief men swear is weather until weather stands up and asks for credit. Cyrus Bell's field hand, Peter, a man with a back like a ram and a smile wrecked by somebody else's temper, found a little wafer in the seam of his jacket. He didn't know how it got there. He didn't ask. He slipped it under his tongue the way a soldier slips pain there when he needs to keep walking. All day his steps felt like his own. The second supper came because men don't know how to stop when the first one doesn't go the way they planned. Invitations went out as if shame were a favor. This time, half the town came to look without being sure what they were looking for. Mercy cooked like a woman stacking bricks around a kindling fire. She made a stew so honest a liar couldn't eat it without sweating. She baked a cradle of cornbread and set a bone die into the corner. The least bite, the last bite, the piece someone always thinks they deserve because they came late but loud. Miss Eliza put on her best dress and did not lace it tight. She wanted room to breathe. She tucked a tiny dried sprig of rosemary into her glove and felt less alone. At 8:13, the clock they kept in the front room disliked that moment and had stopped there twice in the past week. The chandelier shivered again. This time the chain held. But 13 little prisms caught the light and threw it out around the room. Small rainbows puddling on the tablecloth like promises in colors no one had ordered. Women glanced at their plates. Men reached for the salt as if it could make light taste less like truth. Cyrus made a speech that started in his mouth and went wrong in his throat. The sheriff chimed yes sir and amen. Silas poured wine as if wine could pour over a thing and bury it. Mercy stood with her hands quiet and watched the rainbows crawl to the edge of Silas's plate and stop. When the last course went down, Mercy stepped forward as if to present a cake. She lifted the knife and did not cut sugar. She cut the air. "You asked for a ring," she said to Cyrus without looking at him. "You asked for a bride. Here's what I am. I am bound, by your word and my own, before God and everything that came before us. And I am watched. I am witnessed. Hurt me and you hurt a marriage you made. Deny me and you deny the vow you cheered." The room grew unwillingly sober. Something old and inconvenient entered and sat down. No one offered it a chair. It took one anyway. Silas sneered. "You think the law will save you?" Mercy shook her head once. "No," she said. "I think the ledger will damn you." The preacher, trembling in a way only Mercy and God noticed, nodded like a man agreeing with his own conscience. River fog rolled in so thick the hedges wore it like shawls. The house shifted on its foundations with noises only nights make. Eliza, carrying a candle, found dampness down the back stairs where dry ought to live. She followed the wet to a door in the cellar she had never noticed because it had never asked to be noticed. It opened as if it had been waiting for someone polite. Inside, a room the builders had told no one about. Hooks, chains, a bench that had never been a bench. Iron, the sort of iron that learns screams and forgets songs. Eliza did not set her candle down. She would not let that room eat light without paying. She stood in her silk and her good shoes and saw the architecture of her father's money. On the wall, scratched into brick by something harder than shame, a name, Emma. Beneath it, a short line in a hand too small to have belonged to a man. Eliza went back upstairs and fetched the ledger. She brought it down and set it on the iron bench like a judge that would not recuse itself. "Look," she told the book, a madwoman's command. "Look, and learn your own pages." The candle guttered. The ledger's cover swelled as if it had been left in rain. When Eliza opened it, ink from a name on the upper page had bled down into the margin below, spelling nothing and everything. She tore that page free, carried it up, and laid it on Mercy's table. "No more locked doors in this house that women don't hold the keys to," she said, voice low and clear, like prayer over a grave and rage over a cradle. Sheriff Withers came with men. They had rope and papers and expressions men put on when they think they'll need them in the newspaper later. He had decided to arrest Mercy for the crime men invented when no statute fits their stubbornness, disturbing the peace. Whose peace? Mercy asked from the doorway. She had flour on her hands. She did not wipe it off. It looked like she had been blessing things. Silas demanded the sheriff charge her with bewitching, a word that made the preacher's face go white in 6 different places. "No devil here," the preacher said into his collar. "Just vows men don't know how to carry." They took her anyway. Not with hands, they were careful of that now, but with presence, with boots, with the stupid drag of state. They brought her to the Greywater Club, because men think rooms where they have not behaved well are courtrooms if they can find a Bible and a table. The ledger came too. Eliza insisted, the way only a woman of a certain birth can insist without getting shot. Samuel followed with a tray of bread as if it were evidence, which it was. Cyrus staged himself like a portrait of a man pretending to be an institution. "This woman," he declared, "has undone the natural order." "Bread and salt," Mercy said. "You've been breaking it since you knew what mouths were for." They read things that pretended to be charges. The preacher opened his mouth and told the room about habit and repute as if he'd found Revelation stuck between Leviticus and lunch. The men laughed. They didn't laugh long, because the ledger, on the table between them, bled. Not blood. Ink. A circle, slow as a clock and sure as 1, 2, spread from the center of the open page. It reached the numbers, touched them, and where it touched, a tiny white ring formed, as if every figure were wearing a salt cuff. Silas swore and grabbed for the page. Ink came away on his fingertips, black cuffs printed on his skin. 13 circles. He rubbed at them like a man trying to erase a name from a stone. They would not leave. Outside, thunder walked up the road. Silas decided to do what men do when the ledger turns on them. He decided to burn it. He stormed back to Briar Gate and went for fire the way a boy goes for a dare. He doused the hearth with lamp oil and reached for the ledger. Eliza, breathing like she'd run through rain and godlessness both, threw herself between book and flame and locked eyes with her brother for the first time since their father had died and left them money and a curriculum for cruelty. "You will not," she said. "He will," Mercy thought, stepping in behind Eliza with Samuel at her heels. Men who have nothing left but the idea of themselves will always try to set the room on fire to see their shadows big on the wall. Silas grabbed for the iron ring above the stove to tear it down, because a man who cannot bear a small truth will always try to make it smaller. The ring burned his palm. Not with flame, with cold. He yanked back, a sound in his throat like a gate protesting a theft. His hand went white, then red, an imprint of the ring blooming on his skin like a brand no one had ordered. He staggered. His elbow hit the oil. The lamp fell. The oil ran, hungry. Fire caught at the edges of a floor that had never thought it would have to learn how to carry it. Out. Mercy snapped to Samuel, to Eliza, to the house as if it were a living thing with legs. The boy ran for the pump. Eliza grabbed the ledger and clutched it to her chest the way women clutch babies and men clutch reputations. Silas stomped at the fire and spread it. Men good at money are often bad at physics. Heat climbed the wall and reached toward the iron ring like a hand thirsting for something that wouldn't feed it. Mercy took the wet cloth Samuel thrust at her and laid it over the ring's nail. "Not you," she told the metal. "You hold." The kitchen breathed. Flames hissed. The pump handle screamed in Samuel's hands as he brought water like an argument you know you'll win if you keep speaking. Eliza flung bucket after bucket. Mercy moved with the calm of a woman who has put out worse fires in smaller rooms with less help. When the last is died and the only smoke was the ghost of what men had tried and failed to ruin, Silas stood, chest heaving, hair singed comedy flat against his skull. His face carried the expensive shock of a man whose money was no use for once. "Get out," Eliza said to him, in the voice of a landlady speaking to a tenant who has broken the kind of rule even other tenants respect. He gaped. "My house." "Mother's house," Eliza corrected softly. "Built on lies I have read now with my own eyes. Leave, or I will tell the town the rest of the ledger." He went. He did not slam the door because the door would not have him. Men who think they own exits rarely practice leaving. Briar Gate survived in a new shape. 3 planks of floor replaced, 1 wall patched, the kitchen ceiling carrying a smoke print like a halo that had decided to sit down and stay. Mercy baked 13 loaves and sent them, piece by piece, to 13 houses that had eaten free and spoken cheaply and would need to decide now if they wanted to keep doing both. She saved the heel of the 13th for herself and set the bone die into it for good measure, a punctuation the world could not sand down. Silas left with his right hand wrapped in linen, a horse he'd named for a man he'd ruined, and an idea of himself that would rot from the inside the first time he poured water and saw the ring prints stand out under the wet. Sheriff Withers discovered a pain in his palm that flared whenever he reached for a rope he wasn't born to hold. Cyrus Bell's dice turned cold in his pockets. When he threw, they told the truth and he never did. The preacher came with a paper, unsigned. "No court," he said to Mercy, "but a covenant, a statement. Folks set their names to it. Says a vow spoken in the kitchen ain't less a vow. Says hurt to a wife is hurt to a wife. They said it careful. They said it scared. They said it loud enough to hear themselves, for once." Eliza moved her bed to the small room off the kitchen and slept with the ledger on a stool. as if guarding it from exactly the kind of men she had shared a last name with for long enough. "If anyone asks," she told Mercy, "this house is under new management. Old rules still apply. Nobody goes hungry. New rules. Nobody gets hurt without the ledger writing it down." Samuel grew into a young man quick as June. He kept the Bell's Code and passed it beyond fences, to kitchens that did not yet know they were countries. The iron ring stayed on its nail. Sometimes, late, it would hum once, a cloth-thin sound that made the hairs on a body stand up and listen. It hummed the morning a rider blew in from Baton Rouge with a story about a wedding forced by bet in a house by the levee and a cook who turned the word bound into a blade. It hummed again when it heard the rider say, because riders always say more than they mean to, that the story had crossed the river and taken on legs of its own. Mercy wrote a list on the ledger's inside cover in a hand that had never been taught to write and did not need to be. Names. Dates. Who witnessed. Who ate. Who left hungry on purpose. She wrote Emma first. Then Eliza. Then Samuel, because a boy who fetches water for a fire earns his way into a book. Then her own name, because sometimes courage is putting yourself on the same page as other people's pain. The town learned to look at the kitchen door different. Men paused on the threshold without knowing why and took off their hats as if conviction had hair that needed air. Women came by to borrow sugar and returned it with a slice of something sweet and the kind of conversation you cannot have in parlors. The number 13 showed up where it wanted to. 13 pennies found in a parlor chair, 13 blue feathers on the path to the pump, 13 lines in the sky at dusk that looked like a hand laid open in blessing. And as for Silas Merrick, some say he took the river road and kept riding until the water forgot his name. Some say he set up house across the line and tried to marry again, but every time a preacher reached the word bound, the man's right hand burned and the Bible slipped. Some say he returned in secret and stood outside Mercy's window to listen for a while, not sure what he wanted, absolution or another argument with a woman who would keep winning after he'd gone. History did what it always does. It tried to bury the story in a soft bank and tell the river to be sensible. But the current had learned a new trick from Mercy. Go quiet, go steady, we're stoned down anyway. If you've listened this far, you know the truth the ledger never wanted to learn. Vows are not paper. They are kitchens, and heat, and hands, and what people do when watched. A joke became a cage and a woman turned the bars into a bell. When it rang, 1, then 3, people heard themselves. Do you think the pages we didn't open tonight would tell a worse story or a better one? Did the town change because a woman made it? Or did it change because it finally looked at itself long enough to be ashamed? Drop your thoughts below and tell me where you're listening from. What vows do the old houses near you still owe? If this kind of buried history and spine-in-the-dark storytelling speaks to you, share this with a friend, hit subscribe, and ring the bell so the next tale finds you first. I'm signing off for now. This has been Tales Never Told. Until next time, keep your bread salted, your ledgers honest, and your doors listening.